You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello everybody, this is Thomas from Double Edge Double Bill, here with a little disclaimer at the top of the show. In this episode, there's a bit of outdated information in reference to the George Lucas talk show, which our lovely guest Patrick Cotnoir is a producer on and on-screen talent for. He announced, along with the George Lucas talk show in general, shortly after he recorded, that they were taking a sudden indefinite hiatus on the show. So some things like the live recordings every Sunday or the Seth Rogen episode they reference in particular didn't end up happening. And they don't know when they'll be coming back, but we do hope Patrick and his collaborators like Conor Ratliff, who plays George Lucas on the talk show, and Griffin Newman, who plays Watto, along with everybody else who works on that show over at Plant Scum, a restful break, and hopefully whenever they do come back at their own pace, it's a show that's just as good or even better than it previously was. And also just shout out that we had mentioned this really in the episode. Those guys also did a lot of great charity watch-along marathons while they watch stuff like Muppets Tonight or the Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip and raised money for charity. And they ended up raising about $150,000 for various different charities over the course of the last several months. So not only is it a fun, entertaining show, but they also did really help out a lot of people over the last several months. And like I ended up saying in the show, it was a really fun, entertaining show over the course of the quarantine. And I'd recommend, we'll have a link to the YouTube channel in our show notes to definitely watch the archives. Over 300 hours worth of content that I would definitely recommend to anyone out there who either likes Star Wars, improvised comedy, or both at the same time. Good Venn diagram. But anyway, here is the episode as we recorded it. Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the Double Edge Double Bill. This week, George Lucas sprays Howard the Duck graffiti like an American. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode, when we'll have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. And I am Thomas Mariani with a black belt in Quack Fu.
Oh man, and I am Adam Thomas, and I am regretting that joke and choice of movie.
We'll get into all that, Adam, but we're not the only ones here, because we have a guest here. He is a producer, and he is an on-screen talent on the great George Lucas talk show, which you can find on the internet here, is Mr. Patrick Cotnoir. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. How are you?
As good as you can be post Howard the Duck, of course.
Yeah.
Considering.
Yeah. Oh, so great. So you guys are doing great. That's
fantastic.
What you're trying to tell me?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
amazing.
Good.
On cloud 9, for sure, yes. But before we get too far into our subject, which we're talking about, George Lucas is our subject today for the show, why don't you tell people a bit about the George Lucas talk show? What exactly is it? Because I'm a huge fan, but it is kind of like a high concept thing to really get around.
The easiest way I describe it to people is it's a streaming internet talk show that treats itself like The Tonight Show as if it's hosted by retired filmmaker George Lucas. Comedian Conor Ratliff, who you might know from Marvelous Mrs. Maisel or his podcast Dead Eyes, plays George Lucas, and Griffin Newman, who you might know from the Tick or Blank Check podcast, plays Watto, who, if you don't remember, is the CGI slave owner from The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. And they interview real guests as themselves. We've had Whoopi Goldberg on. We've had Jason Mantzoukas on. This weekend, Seth Rogen is on. I don't know when this is coming out, but crazy people who should not be on this show. But it's a very fun time, and all of it's on YouTube. And we're live every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern on planetscum.live.
Yeah, I was introduced to the show just basically through hearing that you initially did it as a live stage show. And I was aware from like Griffin Newman with the Blank Check podcast, which I love. And then finally you did it as like the live show starting like almost a year ago with the May the 4th, like 30-hour Star Wars marathon.
It'll be a year in less than a month, which is insane and not something I want to think about.
True, but it's been a great balm for this terrible time. I watch every Sunday, and I also love watching on the YouTube. What I love doing is pretty much like watching when I can, because like on Sundays I might be like watching a movie or like editing this show, but I love like tuning in and out during the live show, just catching whatever weird things you guys are doing from like time to time, and then watching the whole thing on YouTube, just like, oh, it's like a mystery. I get the connecting threads
together.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like Memento a little bit, where like you see all the pieces and then you're like, I have no idea what this means, and then you watch the whole thing and you're like, oh, okay, I sort of understand it now.
I really need to stop tattooing myself. It's a real problem. So has doing the George Lucas talk show, whether on stage or in this format, has that affected your view on George Lucas himself and his movies at all?
Definitely. I mean, I feel like at this point, I mean, this sounds overwhelming to people who don't know the show, but we've done like over 300 hours of the show during quarantine. So I've spent so much more time with fake George Lucas than I obviously have with real George Lucas, even in like documentaries and like commentaries and stuff like that. So it's definitely a very weird wavy line trying to remember what is actual George Lucas lore and what is fake Connor Ratliff George Lucas lore. It makes me like him, I always liked him obviously, but it makes me feel warm, nice feelings towards him just because I'm like, oh, that's my friend, George is my friend. And there's a lot of times where I'm talking to Connor on the phone and I will just call him George just because I'm so used to having to like condition my brain to not call him Connor while we're on the show. It's definitely made it so that it's a lot of what I have thought about during this pandemic, just because of like so much time being put into like prepping that show or trying to book guests or something like that, where it's like, I've seen American Graffiti like 3 times during this pandemic. I've watched Howard the Duck like 2 or 3 times just so I can like kind of familiarize myself. So in case it comes up on the show, I will not sound like a dork who doesn't remember things.
As opposed to a dork who remembers things.
Exactly. Thank you. It's definitely it's a positive experience overall, though. I
think that's honestly what I love about the concept of you guys doing the George Lucas talk show. Is like, I grew up watching George Lucas in so many interviews. He was one of the first like filmmakers I attached myself to when I was younger, getting into movies. And it's so interesting because you think of Star Wars and all this big splendorous like special effects stuff he did, and he's one of the more boring speakers in interviews. It's
for sure
so fascinating. So then Connor Ratliff kind of taking on this persona and adding so much weird affectations to it honestly makes it like such a fun character, especially as like a talk show presence. Mm-hmm.
There's things that he will say that then you will find out real George Lucas has either said or like basically done. Like there was some on the show, Connor loves the Looney Tunes, so the Looney Tunes come up so much. And then this week, Mark Hamill tweeted about how real George wanted Duck Dodgers, the animated short, with Daffy and all that. He wanted that to play before the original Star Wars in 1977. And it's just like such a funny, weird like connection that I never would have thought was like a real thing. And then I saw it, in front of me and I was like, am I hallucinating this? What is happening right now?
Right, for sure. And I mean, Adam, what about you? What are your sort of connections to Lucas? Obviously, probably a Star Wars was like the big kicking off point, but what do you think of him as sort of like a weird figure in Hollywood sort of history?
I'll agree with you as far as like being interviewed. He's just so bland and boring. But it's funny, I was just having this conversation with my brother a couple nights ago. I think George Lucas is basically a genius. Especially when it comes to world building. There's all these fan theories that come out and have been coming out since Star Wars, where people come up with these wild ideas, and sometimes they're dead on, they're 100% right, and there's no question that George Lucas had that idea in his head while he made the movie at the time. I mean, he's just come up with so many just crazy rabbit holes and sort of lineage and genealogy to all these different characters and creatures and worlds and everything that it's say what you will about maybe his filmmaking abilities in the later half of his career. There's no denying that A, he's like I said, he's a genius. B, he created, would you say, arguably the greatest pop culture moneymaker of all time, with arguably the most fervent fan base. I mean, for all the faults people might have against him, it doesn't outweigh anything that he's contributed to modern day pop culture and fandom.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so, and especially it's so interesting even that like you can tell he has like so many ideas swimming in his head with interviews, but also I kind of love the old grandpa-ishness of seeing stuff like the behind the scenes stuff for the prequels, where there's so much footage of him just like seeing designs and he's like, yeah, that one works. Let's do that one. It's so fascinating to see because like he can spot talent or like really creative craft, but he's also so nonchalant. Like, yeah, like we'll be talking about with American Graffiti. I love that apparently all he did for auditions was just like very simple 5-minute interviews, and I was just like, okay, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
And then he hired people later. He's such a weird, fascinating figure.
I mean, you can't deny the guy is a great ideas man. That's like his biggest strength. And I think where a lot of the faults come in that people will throw at him is that he's not necessarily the best at executing all of those ideas, you know, to various degrees. But like he's a great ideas man, and he can see talent when, you know, when it's in front of him. Like so many people that he hired early on in their careers have either gone on to huge things, whether it's special effects or, you know, just, you know, any kind of like behind the scenes thing. So many people who worked on Star Wars as like their first or second movie are like still working today. And it's fascinating to just think of the lineages that he has created, you know, throughout the years.
Well, and interestingly, we'll be talking about two oddly not Star Wars related ones. We kind of intentionally did that just because I'm sure you would have been too Star Wars out. And plus, there's so much Star Wars talk on the internet anyway.
Yeah, so many people talk about Star Wars, so I'm very happy that we are not talking about Star Wars.
Yes, that's true, because at the end of our last episode, where we did our random picking of our good and bad pick for the episode, we ended up with my good choice of American Graffiti and Adam's bad choice of Howard the Duck, which we'll be talking about in detail here. So let's first start off with American Graffiti.
American Graffiti! Where were you in 62?
Grab that special one and jump into your candy-colored custom or your screaming machine, cruise downtown and catch American Graffiti.
American Graffiti! Baby, what's that?
It's a movie.
Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
It's one of those great old movies about romance, racing, and rock and roll.
American Graffiti! Where were you in 62?
And American Graffiti came out August 11th, 1973 from George Lucas, which he wrote with Gloria Katz and William Hayek. I apologize, because every time I see his last name, I just think of, like, the goofy noise, ostensibly. So it's hard, but they also, of course, would be the main people behind our next feature. I didn't even remember that those two were as heavily involved. And they also, like, wrote, what was it, Temple of Doom and Radioland Murders, amongst other weird George Lucas-y projects. And this was his second feature that he directed, after he had done THX 1138, which wasn't a huge splash at the time. It was a much more sterile Stanley Kubrick-style sci-fi movie. And then his producer buddy, Francis Ford Coppola, said, hey, why don't you make a mainstream movie? Why don't you make something that people actually want to see? And so he wrote this, and it was such a big success, he got his stupid little space movie made.
And we lucked out.
Yeah. Very true, very true. But I'm curious, especially Patrick, given obviously like so much of the Star Wars lineage after this, how do you feel like this one works for like Lucas in terms of what we know about him? Considering, I would argue, of the various different ones he's directed, the only 6 or so, it sticks out like a weird thumb in the middle of them.
Yeah, it's definitely very strange. It was a movie that I recently rewatched, maybe like 2 months ago or something like that. I hadn't seen it in a really long time. And my memory of it was that I didn't like it. I thought it was very boring. It just was not for me. I think I saw it in high school, and it was just not for me at the time. And then I watched it again with my roommate. I think we were prepping. We were doing a Harrison Ford show. We were talking to people who were in Harrison Ford movies. And I was like, oh, wait, this movie rocks. This movie's really good. And we watched this, and then we watched more American Graffiti, which is the sequel, which is also on HBO Max. And I think people should check it out because it's wild.
I recently checked that out, and it is fascinating as a follow-up to this movie.
It's fascinating. Yeah. We could talk about it in a little bit because it's fascinating. But yeah, no, I mean, it definitely sticks out, and it makes you yearn to see what George would have directed if he didn't get mashed into the Star Wars meat grinding machine for the rest of his career, basically. Because if he, could have made more movies in this vein, it would have been interesting just to see where he would have gone. Because it definitely is so different from almost everything else that he's done in his career.
Francis Ford Coppola literally says at a certain point, like, it's a tragedy what happened to George, because he could have been such an interesting filmmaker if he didn't go down, like, the Star Wars path. But Adam, how do you feel about this one?
I think I got pretty much the same origin story with it. I saw it probably maybe early high school, if not even before that. My dad was a big fan of it, so he had me watch it. And I remember thinking it was so boring and so bland and dumb. And then the same thing, I revisited it probably about, I don't know, man, 6 to 8 years ago. And I was like, this is one of the greatest fucking one-off movies by any director I've ever seen, because that's really what this is. It's a complete just departure from everything he's done before and since, and it's kind of nuts that it works as well as it does, and it's basically a masterpiece, because it shouldn't. It really shouldn't. The same guy who made Star Wars and produced, the Raiders movies and Howard the Duck and all these wild shit should not have been able to make American Graffiti, this sort of small tale populated by just rich characters that you end up really caring about all of them and want to see where their story is going to go. And, beginning of the movie, you might hate one of the characters, and at the end, you love them. It's just so expertly done and made that it's bewildering to me that this is a George Lucas movie. I still, like, every time I watch it, I have to think it's Spielberg or something, or else I get distracted, because it just doesn't make sense to me at all.
No, and I think it's because it feels so personal to him, in the same way that, like, Star Wars was personal because of how much he loved, like, the serial stuff from Flash Gordon and all that other stuff. It feels very personal just about, like, him living in Modesto, California, and how much of it is, like, so much about, like, hey, this is a small town, I want to kind of get out of here, but at the same time really immersing you in this particular time, and especially considering, like, it's such a weird time, 62, because it's like, they mentioned, like, they want to meet President Kennedy at some point, stuff like that. It's like, this is such a point before, like, so many major shifts in American culture that would happen, and it's such an interesting portrait of that. But also, it doesn't feel like just a winking nostalgia fest kind of thing. It's also just, like, a fun, rousing movie that, as we mentioned, it feels so different from Lucas. It feels more like a Robert Altman movie, because it's like a casual hangout thing.
You mentioning 62 also reminds me, I was so confused when I watched it this last time, because in my head, it was like a 50s movie. I was like, oh, this takes place in the 50s. And now thinking, like, if this movie came out today, it would be set in 2010. It messed with my head so much, because it just felt so much older than what it actually was. I for some reason, I always assumed it was like mid-50s.
It's a great examination of sort of that point early in a decade before, like, things really crystallize into what the 60s would be, pretty much, and it's a lot bleed over from the 50s, and just a really fun way. And also, we spoke about George Lucas, like, spotting so much talent. This is a cast of so many, like, amazing people, where, like, I love that the name at the time in this cast is Ron Howard, who, like, completely, like, this is his, like, I'm no longer a little kid actor, I'm gonna do something a bit more daring, and whatnot, and he's a massive asshole. Weirdly, like, you would not figure Ron Howard is, like, the biggest dick of this cast of people, but, like, it really, it somehow works. And then also, like, obviously Richard Dreyfuss and Charles Martin Smith. My favorite, honestly, is probably Candy Clark, who spends a lot of her time with Charles. Like, I love all of the stuff with her and Charles Martin Smith. It's, like, so funny, and I love their chemistry. It's so weird and cute.
There's so many people that have good chemistry. Like, even, the Mackenzie Phillips and Paula Matt stuff is weird, but it's like, they're both really funny in it. And, like, you look at it and you're like, oh, Paula Matt should have been a movie star. And it's a bummer that, like, you don't get more, he's obviously in a bunch of stuff, but, like, that it didn't continue on through his career. And even, like, Cindy Williams is great in it. There's so many people. You could go through literally everyone.
Do you guys think this might be a little autobiographical too for George Lucas? Maybe a little bit.
Oh, he loves cars. He loves going fast.
Yeah. So I think wouldn't you say he's Curtis and Toad? like,
yeah.
those would be the two characters I would identify himself. But no, my favorite's probably Richard Dreyfuss in it. I think he's really, really good in it. I've always been a young Richard Dreyfuss fan, not so much Mr. Holland's opus and beyond. But yeah, no, I would say probably Curtis. I think Curtis is really fun. But no, my favorite bit is with Toad and Debbie when they're drinking and she keeps talking about the goat killer. I just think that's so funny, and it works on so many levels. Ron Howard is the most dislikable character in the movie, and that is crazy. But I think everybody in it just turns in a pretty fantastic performance. I'd be hard pressed to really pick out a super weak link in the bunch.
And all of them just have moments where they sparkle, where it's like Patrick was saying, you would figure any of these people could become stars. Even down to Harrison Ford has like 3 scenes in this movie, and you immediately see why, like, oh, this dude would be a massive star not too long after this. It makes so much sense. Just any of the moments where he's like looking over at Paul Lamette and Mackenzie Phillips inside of their car, and just like the smiles he gives, and all like even the simple attire of like he's in a white shirt, cowboy hat, but instantly you're just like, that guy is the most charismatic and handsome person I've ever seen.
Yeah, he looks cool as hell. Even in just a white shirt, you're like, oh man, this guy is, I mean, obviously it's tough looking back at it now and thinking what kind of headspace those people would be in, but you're like, of course this guy becomes a huge movie star. Of course.
And what a genius idea for him to wear the cowboy hat too. It's so genius. It sets him apart from everyone too. And just enough of a way to where he's got this really out of sort of place wardrobe. You know what the hell I'm trying to fucking say. God. Anyways, this really out of place choice that it almost identifies him as a threat because he's so different than everyone else. And it's pretty smart just on wardrobe alone. Oh my God, I can't speak tonight. I think it's because of Howard the Duck, but we can keep going.
No, yeah, I think it's such a phenomenal display of like the costume design and just how strong the characters are. I think where even if like say Ron Howard can be like the biggest asshole of the group, I believe so much in his story with like Cindy Williams, where this feels like a real weird like high school relationship that is on the brink of like falling apart, but they kind of try and stick together despite that. Especially, I love the scene at the sock hop where they do like the slow dance and they're arguing with each other. And one of my favorite comedic beats is just like they're having this intense argument with each other while they're dancing, and it does like a cut to that like a wider shot, and they're just doing like the most stiff, awkward dancing everyone is confused by. It's such a fantastic cut, and I think that's another weird thing is like Star Wars has plenty of humor in it, but this feels so much funnier than any other George Lucas movie.
Now, having seen more American Graffiti, does that negatively or positively impact your thoughts on this movie?
I think it gives me much stronger feelings toward this movie because it feels so much more like a natural piece, where it just and it's so consistent, it flows so perfectly. It doesn't feel like it's nearly 2 hours long or anything like that. It just feels like so perfectly put together, even though it's obviously a much less ambitious movie. Because if you don't know, folks, more American Graffiti takes place like over the course of 4 different New Year's Eves, chronicling one character from this movie. And they're all shot in various different styles, like we see Toad in Vietnam, and it looks like a Super 16 movie. And there's following Debbie when she gets into like Woodstock level hippie culture, and it's split screen and all this stuff. It's fascinating. It doesn't work, but I respect the weird ambition, and more importantly, how it's just like, oh hey, this big, incredibly successful movie. How do we follow it up? Doing something that would alienate anyone who liked the first movie, pretty much.
The thing I really enjoy about that movie is the editing and the different styles, though. I think it's just like, you don't see it in movies. Like how one section will look like you're watching like 24 with like multiple cameras, on the screen at the same time from going at the same different angles. And like one thing is like 16 millimeter in Vietnam. Like just the look of it, I enjoyed obviously so much more than the content. But I think it's fascinating because it feels ballsier than a lot of sequels at that time, I imagine, felt. One of my favorite details about that movie, the sequel, is that, if I remember right, George wanted someone to write a script for the sequel. So this guy like wrote a script, and George goes, "Great, you're directing it too." And it was like not that guy's plan. But I think it's just very funny where he's just like, "Yeah, okay, this is a good script. You can do it too. I'll just let you direct it." I think it's funny.
But to turn that question at least to you, Patrick, do you feel like watching that movie at least kind of strengthens your appreciation for this one as well?
Yeah, I think so. But I have a weird brain where, like, and this is going to sound like a tangent, but it's not, I promise. I feel like a lot of people will watch something, like, say that they watch Lost, right? But they don't like the last season of Lost. And they'll be like, well, I just pretend like that didn't happen. Or even, Star Wars, if they don't like the sequels, they'll be like, well, I just pretend like those didn't happen. My brain will automatically go, well, that's what happened. I watched it. I know that that's how it all turned out. And I feel like watching more American Graffiti, it enhances it, because I'm like, well, now I know what happens to those characters after this movie. I'm like, it can only enhance it for me, even if it's a bad experience. I'm like, well, it stinks that they all had shitty lives after this movie, but it helps paint a broader picture for my weird brain.
You don't necessarily need much more than the end credit thing, which is like kind of stunning, honestly, in this movie. That it just, after all this fun, it's just like, oh, hey, one's a writer, one stayed in Modesto, and the other two are either missing or dead. It seems like a bold declaration of just like, oh, this moment in time, it completely evaporated not too long afterward. I think that's fascinating. If nothing else, it's also pretty innovative, because that wasn't as common a cinematic technique at that point. Much like a lot of other things, like the music, the soundtrack choice, and some of this other stuff that like the movie like really innovated. I feel like it does. I sort of respect that gumption for more American Graffiti, but at the same time, so much like fun, innovative stuff happens in this. I'll ask this. Adam, are you at all enticed to watch more American Graffiti after we talked about it?
I've seen it. I have seen it.
Okay.
Yeah. Not recently. It's been quite a while. And I got to be honest, I don't remember a thing about it until you guys started mentioning like the crazy cuts and the editing and stuff. So I kind of remember that.
Sounds like you got to rewatch it, buddy.
I think I have to. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think I'm going to enjoy it.
No.
But if anything, it's because you fucking like kind of put me on a thing here, so you laid out a challenge. All right, I'm gonna watch the shit out of it. I'm gonna get it tattooed on my back.
And give us your book report and progress report and everything next time, and we'll have
like a clear little folder with the color pencil drawing for the cover art.
Right. Yes. But I do also want to say, I think another great moment, like you mentioned the Curtis stuff, but the presence of Wolfman Jack in this whole movie, I think, is such an amazing, and he's such a unique, real figure that George Lucas was so attracted to. And it's so weird how, like, he really weaves the movie together with his, like, different radio announcements that were actually very much what he used to, like, put out on the radio. And I love him as sort of this weird cultural figure that kind of fits the folklore of this town that, like, well, we have nothing to do in Modesto, let's fantasize about whatever weird stuff Wolfman Jack does. And all that build up to the actual scene where he shows up is like, it's such a beautifully, perfectly orchestrated scene of just like trying to convince Curtis, like, get out of here. And then the reveal that he's actually Wolfman Jack is like, it's so perfectly put together.
He's like a good actor in it too. It's like, you don't always expect those real life people to like actually put together good performances. But then when he shows up, you're like, yeah, I believe what this guy's putting down. He's like, you feel the emotion in that scene.
That's actually kind of one of the things that always stuck with me about this movie too, is Wolfman Jack. And I don't know if it's because he was called Wolfman or not. I mean, to be honest, I was a dumb kid when I saw it. That's probably a big part of it. But he's great. It's almost like he pushes the narrative without even really talking about the story itself. But if he wasn't in there, if you didn't have him on the radio or anything, it would not have the same feel, I'd argue.
It really wouldn't flow nearly as well as it does, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think that it's really the glue that keeps the movie together, where all these different disparate like storylines that are happening are inherently like very interesting, like the Paul Le Mad and Mackenzie Phillips stuff. There's so much like drag race energy that feels once again very much of the time, but then connecting with the more goofy stuff like Charles Martin Smith trying to steal alcohol, or the Ron Howard, Cindy Williams stuff. There's so many like different connecting threads that you need something like a Wolfman Jack to really keep it together to some degree. Before we segue into our next feature, because there's so much to talk about, I do want to ask, do you see any of the stuff from American Graffiti really carry over into like his later, in the Star Wars stuff, any of the other things he's produced, especially like a Patrick? Do you see any of like the DNA that would later come about in this Lucas's other projects?
I would say here. Let me try and I'm trying to make the list in my head of things. Music is always a big part. Obviously he works with John Williams a lot, but it sort of functions the same way where it's like it is important whether it's pop music or orchestral music. Always stays very important to him. The humor always stays important. Whether or not it's always successful is a different story, but he at least tries to inject some humor and stuff, especially in New Hope and Empire, I guess, to a lesser extent, but New Hope definitely has a similar vibe of humor in a lot of it. And I think him shooting the drag race and all the racing throughout the movie, take out the cars and put in spaceships, and it definitely it holds over throughout the rest of his directing career after this, because that's all he really is directing after this is spaceship movies.
So you're saying this is the original pod race, is the drag race in this movie?
What I'm saying is the Boonta Eve classic originated in Modesto. That's what I'm trying to say.
Who's Sebulba, though? Who's our Sebulba here?
It's gotta be Bob Falfa, doesn't it? It's gotta be Harrison Ford.
That makes sense, true. He's the same kind of renegade who would throw fish things at a Jar Jar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and those two twins that Sebulbas are hanging out with, the blue twins that he's hanging out with, that's the Suzanne Summers who's in the car with Harrison Ford. It's the same vibe.
Yes, exactly. Same vibe. 100%. I can't dispute it. But what about Adam? Do you see any of that carry over into some of the later Lucas projects from here?
I mean, yeah. Other than what Patrick mentioned already, just also, he really does have an eye for casting young talent. He did keep doing up until the end. I mean, whether you agree with some of the casting choices or not, he always wanted to give sort of young guys and up and comers their due, and that's something he was also felt like he was very beholden to his whole career. Not only is that pretty damn cool, because you got to figure near the end of his career he could have probably gotten anybody he wanted to be in like the Star Wars prequels or anything like that, but he just stuck to his guns and cast the people he thought were right for the job. And obviously that started here. Like you said, he would do 5-minute interviews and that's all it would take, and he'd choose them. And that's something, for better or for worse, that he continued to do. And I think that alone is pretty impressive as well.
Yeah, I think the big thing I just was noticing, especially rewatching it this time, is just how much of the fun, spontaneous energy he would try to recreate later. Because if you watch THX 1138, it is a completely inhuman, devoid of emotion movie by design.
Full of fun and spontaneous energy, THX 1138.
Robert Duvall, the most fun-loving guy possible. Uh-huh. And there's race in that movie, too. He's in a car at one point, so it's clearly very similar. But I think, you can definitely tell that with this movie, he sort of got his initial spring for, oh, hey, let's have, weird, especially, character dynamics we didn't expect to come about, with two completely different personalities, like a Charles Barton Smith or Candy Clark in particular. It isn't that huge an evolution to go from there to eventually, say, Han Solo and Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker meeting each other in A New Hope, and how much that's full of just wisecracking at each other kind of dynamics. Also a really fast-paced energy. To quote Lucas's direction that he did plenty of times, he wanted it faster and more intense. And you can see it start all the way over here. But let's just do quick final thoughts then on American Graffiti before we move on and get to so much fun with Hour of the Duck. Patrick, final thoughts on American Graffiti.
Good movie. I like it. And I think people should watch the whole American Graffiti trilogy.
Right.
Do you guys know about this?
I know because I watch your show so much, but please explain to the audience.
Richard Dreyfuss's parents in American Graffiti are the two main characters in Radioland Murders. So you got Radioland Murders, and then you got American Graffiti, and then you got more American Graffiti. So go check them all out, and they really work well as a whole, that you can definitely tell were meant to be connected.
Where's my box set, Universal? I want it. I want that box set. But Adam, your final thoughts on American Graffiti?
It's a classic for a reason. It hits all the notes it's supposed to. It hits all the notes that you've heard it does. It's a fantastic movie from beginning to end. Acting, the way it's shot, the soundtrack, everything. It's timeless, and it deserves that title.
Yeah, and I think it's one of Lucas's better movies, obviously. I think it's the most interesting one just because we mentioned it sticks out so well, but at the same time, it's got such a great cast and production design and just this real feel of this particular time and place that it's such a great snapshot movie, and it feels like, because this is also a big start of nostalgia culture. with this, because not too long after this is like Happy Days, obviously starring Ron Howard and other stuff like that just milks so much out of like, remember this specific time and place. And I like that Lucas just kind of presents a more honest thing about like, yeah, I remember this time and place, and I had like so many nostalgic memories, but also it was kind of a time where I was really thinking about things differently and I was transitioning in my life. It has like a real emotional honesty to it that, you know, might be lacking in some of his later movies, but you can tell it's always at least been there, and he's always tried to carry that over for better and worse. But before we continue to our next show, here's an ad for an ESO show you can queue up right after ours.
Check out what's been going on with the Pop Culture Cosmos Show and the PCC Multiverse.
People are just losing their minds trying to consume Marvel products right now, and I don't blame them. This is some of the best entertainment you can get on TV and big screen right now.
If something's going to be successful or not, they look at the mentions, they look at the likes, they look at the retweets and the tweets and the subtweets and the tweets, and they look at all of that to say, okay, this is actually going to garner a lot of attention.
Catch our shows on Worldwide Radio 7 days a week and right here on the ESO Network.
And now let's get into Howard the Duck.
Across the sea of stars lies another world, a world almost exactly like ours. This is where he lives. He has everything except fulfillment. And then one night, it happens.
Hey, good buddy, are you home?
He has a very sudden midlife crisis. He lands in Cleveland.
Maybe you're here for some greater purpose, some cosmic cause.
Here, he discovers just who he really is.
Oh,
no. A duck in big trouble.
That's a duck, man.
Howard the Duck, trapped in a world he never made. Coming from George Lucas, a Willard Hike film, a Gloria Katz production.
So, Howard the Duck came out August 1st, 1986. Which was directed by Willard Hayek, along with Gloria Katz, wrote it and produced it with him, and it's the first big-screen Marvel adaptation based on the comics by Steve Gerber. So, you know, it's an innovative film. It really, like, paved the way for what everybody loves now about Marvel movies. Without Howard the Duck, you wouldn't have it, guys.
What a dang movie. What a fun movie, guys. I love this movie. I was so excited that you picked it.
Well, expound upon that. What makes you sort of have so much fun with it, especially considering that's not maybe the most popular opinion? Shocking, Patrick.
No, it's not. It's not the most popular opinion, but you know what? I never said I was the most popular guy, you know? The things that I like about this movie, let's go through them. Here we go. I think Lea Thompson's great in it. I love the practical effects. I love the big monster at the end. I think it's great. I think, Jeffrey Jones, bad guy, good in this movie. And I think we probably can all agree, bad guy.
Yes.
But I think he great. I just want to get it on record from all of us.
Yes.
Really, really commits in this movie. I think he's really funny in this movie. I like when they're on that dang airplane. I think it's I have a good time. I like the song at the end. We'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at those. And maybe more will come up as we go. And listen, I know this is not a popular take, and I'm okay with you guys not agreeing with me, but I just need to speak my truth, and I need to put it out there.
Well, we're glad we had you on to speak your truth and be honest about it right on screen.
Thank you.
But Adam, I can tell you were making some noises that made me officially know you agree 100% with what Patrick's saying. So go ahead and just keep agreeing.
All right. Well, the thing is, this movie is how do I put this? It's nothing if not ambitious. I will say that they definitely do try to do a lot of like sort of goofy world building, especially in the beginning with like all the movie posters and everything's changed into ducks and
you're saying a lot of fun stuff so far.
Jeffrey Jones is really good in it, and yes, he's a terrible person. I cannot say in good confidence that I think Howard the Duck is a good movie because I don't. I don't think it's good. I think it's really, really sort of cheesy, but it is that in a good way. To me, Howard the Duck is the pure definition of a so bad it's good movie. This is one that by the way, I completely will disagree with the final song. I think it's one of the worst fucking things. It just drives me up the fucking wall to the point to torture each other when we were kids. My brother and I would sing it to each other. Just the hook part over and over and over. So we'd just be running around the house. Howard the Duck, Howard the Duck. Now, the thing is, anytime I've seen this movie, and I haven't seen it that much, a good amount of time, but I find myself enjoying it. To the point where, my 5-year-old was watching a lot of it with me today. It's not necessarily made for kids that young, but she doesn't know anything that's happening. Yeah. She just sees a duck in a costume getting beat up by big guys. I did have to stop it when Jeffrey Jones came on because he scared her. Now, I don't know if it's because it was Jeffrey Jones or because he became the monster character. Well, who knows? She might be kind of a psychic. She was getting a kick out of it. So it's like kind of watching it through even someone that young's eyes and just like, this is just pure stupidity and fun. It really is. It's just chaotic, ridiculous fun.
And I want to be clear, that is what I'm looking for in a movie, And I think that's why and this is not even me like doing a bit. Like, I want chaotic, stupid fun. That's what I have fun with. So I think that's why I like this movie. And I can recognize that it's not good. Like, I totally understand. I'm not a complete lunatic, but like,
right.
I'm having a good time while I'm watching it.
It's never boring. I think that's the thing with like most of George Lucas's like failures, quote unquote, or movies that you don't necessarily like. There is always something interesting and distinctly Lucas about it. I think particularly with this movie and how many of the weird different like special effects stuff that you mentioned, or even the very corny jokes, or the weird love of like the film noir like music and how that clashes with the 80s hair metal stuff at the same time. But I think there's also just like, I agree, there's a lot of, at least maybe not even just ambition, but at least like a lot of rousing attempted fun with it that I think especially comes from these two, like Gloria Katz and William Hyuk. Like, you can tell from the earlier movies they collaborated with Lucas on that they add a specific sensibility to any of these movies, whether you like them or not. They have a very specific sense of humor that they really want to like display out there, and I think Howard the Duck has that in such a weird way where even like, I'll agree that most of the effects, especially like even Howard, which was such a weird like idea to like, hey, let's actually do this on live action, let's make a little Howard the Duck costume, when it's like the credit to Ed Gale is the little person in the suit. Howard is much more convincing than I would honestly say you would expect for the time. It's only when he's like animatronic that you can tell like, oh, this is like Chuck E. Cheese level shit. Like when it's just like him like sitting down and shit like that, it's just like, oh, and they even knew that at the time. They're like, let's just focus on him in the suit. It looks a lot better with him just in the suit.
When he's running around and climbing on things, I think it's fun. There were multiple outfits that Howard wore in that movie that I turned in my room and I said, I'd wear that. I would wear that outfit. He looks great. Howard looks great.
He has a variety of different fashions, and particularly the last suit he wears is the manager of the Leah Thompson band. I think it's just like, Howard's looking fly, not gonna lie.
Well, here's what I noticed. You're saying Howard's looking fly. I'm saying Howard's looking McFly, because he's wearing a very similar outfit to what Marty wears at the dance when he plays the guitar. It's a very similar outfit and does a lot of very similar moves while he's rocking out during that song.
I mean, look, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, big friends, I'm sure. It's like, hey, you looking for this outfit you've been looking for Howard the Duck? Well, look at this. Yeah. I'm sure. But
maybe it's the same outfit and they use trick photography. Michael J. Fox is actually like 2.5 feet tall. You don't know. Yeah. It's like a Hobbit situation. Like they filmed it like Lord of the Rings, Back to the Future.
Clearly. But I would agree with you, especially about Leah Thompson, who, like, I love from the Back to the Future movies, and it's a bummer that, like, this movie kind of stopped her from having a huge megastar set. She's obviously still been working. She's so great. I loved her on your show as well. It's one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, she's great.
That you did, but she has this like real like gumption to just go full on into a character like this, and she feels very sincere, very sweet, and also is even willing to go with the wild things they make her do in this movie, like particularly the obvious, like the scene where it's implied they're almost about to have sex, and it's not implied is such a light term, like they are so close to having sex in this movie, and it's baffling, but it's like, you know what, I've never seen that in a movie before. That's completely unique to this fucking movie. I've never seen anyone try and have that kind of weird, like, tension between an animatronic duck and Leah Thompson.
It is very weird, but she sells it in a way that I respect, where I'm like, you're signing up for what they're asking you to do, and it's very good for her. That's what I gotta say. I gotta say good for her.
You know, I've always been a big Leah Thompson fan, you know, and the very next year she'd followed up with what I would say arguably is one of the better of the early John Hughes movies, with Some Kind of Wonderful.
Yeah.
She's always been very capable. Like, even in the Back to the Future movies, she's fantastic in all of them. She goes for it 100%, 110%. Dude, Tim Robbins is great in this movie.
Yes, very early Tim Robbins.
He's out of control manic, and he's also going 100% for it, and he's really quite fun in it.
Yeah. It sounds like you like this movie.
I think I might like it a little bit more than I might have let on.
I mean, if nothing else, I'll say I think I would probably enjoy it a bit more if not for the massive amount of duck puns. Like, I think there would have been a certain level that would have worked for me, and then I think the movie goes tenfold with it. A move I respect, but not necessarily a move that I laugh at that much.
To be fair, though, in the original comics, man, there was a lot of that type of shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a lot. It's a lot like Peter Porker Spider-Ham type.
Yeah.
You know, silly jokes.
Yeah, it's definitely a different tone than the comics, because the comics get like very mystical at points, and like there's a lot of like Man-Thing crossovers and stuff like that. It's great, yeah, and violent and stuff. But then also like very satirical. He runs for president at one point. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. It's a very different tone, but the comics also go hard, and I recommend people going to read the first run of comics because they're great and fascinating.
In fact, I have somewhere the Essential Marvel books. I have a bunch of them. I have one that has the entire, not necessarily the entire opening run, but like all the notable Howard the Duck comics in it. It's pretty fantastic. It's super fun to read, for sure.
Well, yeah, and admittingly, this did sort of taint Howard's image at the time with sort of being a comic book character, and was kind of an infamous bomb when it came out originally. But at the same time, it's kind of like we talked about, it has such a distinctive sort of vibe and feel that could only really come from particularly a mid-'80s movie, with like the look of it, the costumes Leah Thompson wears, or even the various outfits Howard does wear, as you mentioned. It has like so much of a vibe that like this could have only come out specifically in 1986. No point before or afterward. And I think that's what makes it kind of like a weird, interesting time capsule. The big question is, who is this movie for? The answer is obviously one, Patrick. For sure. It's a movie designed specifically for Patrick. But also, like, I think that's what makes it so, it's just sort of interesting, where it's once again, it's a weird, unique gem in the middle of this time period where it's like, there's no real other movie like Howard the Duck. Even the distinctive badness of it doesn't quite equivalent like any other quote-unquote bad movie of the time. And I think it's just because, like, it's like we mentioned, it goes full hog, or full duck, whichever you prefer, with like anything that it's doing, even down to, I agree with you about like the Jeffrey Jones character as much as, once again, bad man, but at the same time, like the
person.
Yes, the makeup effects and the lightning bolts and everything are so like fascinating to watch now. There's like a weird laser light show effect whenever he becomes like the monstrous creature. In particular, it looks amazing, especially like the more sunken in his face gets.
Yeah, I mean, the makeup and everything around him, it's like watching like a zombie movie almost, where like he just becomes more and more deteriorated as the movie goes on. His face gets sunken, and like just the lines get darker and deeper, and it's cool. It's cool. Sorry. All I'm saying about this movie is I like it and it's cool.
Look, speak your truth, like we said. That's how you feel, Patrick. You gotta say it.
Yeah, I'm saying it. I'm not scared.
And what he does with his voice is it's wild and wacky and fun. But again, fuck that guy. Damn it. 10 out of 10, Howard the Duck.
He's been converted. It's a miracle. Oh, wow. That is so bad. That's never happened on this show where someone fully converts somebody on the bad pick. Great job, Patrick. Congrats.
People have tried, but this
somehow.
It was Howard the Duck that did it. Wacky little guy.
Now, and you know what? I will say, Adam, even though with your words about the song, I love the song. I think Thomas Dolby has like a few different songs that like the Leah Thompson band sings. and they're once again very distinctly 80s, but at the same time they have like a fun, upbeat energy to them that I can't help but kind of be fascinated, especially like the rhythm of Howard the Duck as a song is so fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it kind of fits the weird manic energy of this movie, where sequences go on forever, like the airplane thing, or some of the other like big elaborate sequences. It goes on for fucking ever. It's an endless sequence. But at the same time, it kind of has that same energy and vibe where like I grew up, especially as like I was the right age for the prequels, the Star Wars prequels when they came out. And I think those movies have, even though I think they suffer from a bit more consistent pacing issues than this movie does, I can at least say that like there's something always interesting to see on screen. In the same way with Howard the Duck, where it's just like, oh, you would see like there's so much weird stuff that happens like from shot to shot, but at the same time it's never quite that boring. If anything, I would say that makes it slightly better than the prequels, which is that might be a controversial opinion.
I don't know if that's as controversial.
No, these are the hot takes. That's what the internet loves, is these hot takes I'm spewing at them. That's clearly what it needs.
I'm genuinely trying to think whether I enjoyed this more than I enjoyed the prequels, and I'm having a lot of trouble.
Interesting.
I could answer that.
I know you can. How old were you guys when Phantom Menace came out? 1999.
I was 16.
Yeah, too old.
I was 7.
I was also 7.
Yeah, we were the perfect audience.
Age.
Yes, exactly.
The perfect age for it.
100%.
Why don't you guys get married now? Ooh.
I'm just saying, listen, much like Anakin Skywalker, according to Yoda, you were too old, you know?
That's fair.
Too old to begin the training. That's right. You didn't play the pod racing game on N64 like we did. Come on.
Oh, yes, I fucking did. Yes, I did.
Well, we can agree on that. That connects us. It binds us like the Force does, the N64. No, but I think I can at least appreciate, with those prequel movies, they definitely have like so much weird, chaotic energy that's going on there. But Howard does it in a more compact package, despite how much things go super long. And it also has like some of that practical effects authenticity that you would really enjoy out of this, particularly even like what you mentioned, Patrick. I love the monster at the end. It's such a wonderful looking monster. And it's Phil Tippett did the stop motion. It looks perfect. And I think even it's a weird thing where I think the prequels had so much more kind of like money and so much to like fly behind it. Like it doesn't feel like there's as much like risk involved. This feels like a movie that's desperate to make it work.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of bad movie I enjoy more with Howard the Duck.
Yeah.
It has so much, like, we want to make this work. We know the odds are against us, and we're trying to make it work. And I don't think it necessarily perfectly works. I'm not converted, Patrick. I'm sorry. But
that's okay.
I at least respect it fully for what it's trying to do.
Here's what I say. If a movie is really going for what it's trying to accomplish, I will usually enjoy it, even if I acknowledge that it's not a good movie. Like, I will usually say, oh, I enjoyed that movie because they're really trying to get across whatever weird concept that they're going for. And I feel the same way about the prequels. I think they're doing something, whether it's something you like or something you don't like. It's not just a retread cash grab of the original 3 movies, you know? It's something different. And that's, that's how I feel about this movie, too, is it's not, like you guys said, there's no other movie like it. And you have to respect that in a way.
Yeah, that sounds like pretty good final thoughts, Patrick, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I think that's it. This movie's good.
All right, well, Adam, now that you've been converted as well, go ahead and agree with those final thoughts.
I mean, I do agree that if the ambition wasn't on the screen, I don't think this would be as enjoyable. But it is very ambitious, and they are committed to making this weird, wacky movie the best they can make it. And that gives it a sense of charm that if this was just a pure on cash grab or something like that, it wouldn't have. Again, I don't think it's a great movie. I'll never say that, but I do think it's very fun. I think it's very entertaining. And for all of its weirdness, absurdity, cheese, just weird decisions. I mean, we didn't even talk about duck boobs, but just the weird stuff that they put on screen here, and they're fully committed 100% of the time. So, I mean, it's worth a watch just for that alone.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with at least that much. I think it's like I said, Lucas has, when he made, like, or produced even just these weird movies, it always has this distinctive stamp of Lucas, whether it is, like, the special effects stuff or the just weird decision of just like, yeah, we'll make our main character like a sentient duck that's like 2 feet tall and has like stands on, 2 legs and has feather arms. Sure, we'll do that. And he didn't even question for a second that wouldn't work. I think it's that ambition really works for it. And I think that's what makes our, with like Willard and Gloria, like their ability to try and like run with that. I think that makes it such a fascinating watch where you might not like the movie, and I get it. I'm kind of in that camp. I'm not necessarily the hugest fan, but it's like such a fascinating, weird movie of its era that can't really be duplicated, can't really be recreated. And nothing else, like, I like a lot of the modern Marvel movies, but it doesn't have stuff like an unwrapped condom inside of a wallet, which we didn't talk about either. It's a fucking moment that happens in this goddamn movie. It's insane.
The 80s were weird, man. The 80s were weird.
Yeah. That's very true. Or also Howard working as like a weird janitor for what seems to be a sex spa, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna say it again. The 80s were weird, man.
Very true. Very true. But that's the end of our discussion of our very weird double feature here. But we are going to get into the close of our show, including our picking for next week. Stay tuned for that. But first, we had some thoughts from all you out there over on Facebook and Twitter at DEDBpod. We asked you all about, like, hey, what are your favorite, least favorite movies related to our topic we're doing? We had a couple people contribute, like James Rodriguez, who says American Graffiti is a humorous yet bittersweet look and innocence of youth, right up to the gut punch of an end. A more personal film from Lucas, I wish we could have seen more of that side from him. And there's also some movies involving archaeologists and lightsabers. And then Ryan Quarterman says, best Howard the Duck, worst Star Wars. See?
He's such a fucking troll, that kid.
He often trolls in our... That's true, but we love him for it. But I guess this is a good section to especially talk about. Like, Patrick, what are some other George Lucas things that you want to bring people's attention to? Like, weird, obscure things that you find fascinating?
Radioland Murders is fascinating to me. It's a movie that you really got to hunt for if you want to watch it. It's a slapstick comedy about a radio station in the 40s where people are getting murdered, but it's got like such a good comedy cast, and it doesn't necessarily succeed, but I think there's a lot of fun, slapsticky, physical comedy gags in it that I think it's probably worth watching, even if it's not good. The other one that we always talk about on the show is Strange Magic. Do you guys? I know you probably know about Strange Magic, but like, should I explain it to everybody?
Go ahead, because especially that was Adam's alternate choice. We almost did instead of Howard the Duck.
Whoa!
We almost could have been talking about that.
I mean, for the people who are listening who don't know anything about Strange Magic was a movie that Lucas was working on before he sold Lucasfilm to Disney. It came out because Disney, as part of the deal when they released Star Wars, they also had to release Strange Magic, which was almost done when it got sold. It was released on, I believe it's over 5,000 screens, and it holds the record for the lowest grossing animated film released on over 5,000 screens. But it's a jukebox fairy musical starring Alan Cumming and like Maya Rudolph and like crazy people. I think Tucci's in it. It's a wild movie. It goes in and out of Disney Plus, so if it pops up, you should watch it, just because knowing that it comes from George's mind. Basically what his pitch was when they were making it was, I have an iPod with 100 songs on it. Let's make a movie for girls. That's what he says. I made Star Wars for boys. I made Strange Magic for girls. Take of that what you will. And it's just a bunch of fairies singing like, I can't help falling in love with you, and like Sugar Pie Honey Bunch and Bad Romance. It's a very weird movie.
Yeah, I hadn't watched either of those until the auspice of, like, you at one point watched both of those on the George Lucas Talk Show. And both are, like you mentioned, very fascinating. Like, especially with Radioland Murders was his last big movie before the Star Wars prequels really went into production. And it's so fascinating, just like you mentioned, the huge cast down to, it's George Burns' last movie? He just pops up for a second. It's really weird.
Yeah.
And then also with Strange Magic, that one also, it's a bad animated movie in a time where we've had so many different bad animated movies, but also it has such a unique design to all the characters to where it doesn't just look like, oh, hey, we're ripping off Pixar or DreamWorks or whatever. It's just like, no, this is a very distinct design. And it's also, that's the last movie George Lucas has a credit on as of yet. Yeah. So I think it's his final note to cinema is Strange Magic, so why not? Like, if you're a completionist.
Watching it, just knowing that he had a heavy hand in it, makes it so much more interesting than watching, like, what's that movie? Epic? You remember that movie?
Right, the Blue Sky, like a lot of the Blue Sky movies kind of had that.
Yeah. Feels very similar in tone to Strange Magic, but Strange Magic, when you're like, oh, but also one of the most famous filmmakers in the universe, and like did so much on this movie. It's just interesting. It's interesting.
Well, two I wanted to mention, because especially they just dropped on Disney Plus recently, and I watched them over the weekend, were the Ewok movies, the TV movies, where if you don't know, after Return of the Jedi, the Ewoks got 2 spin-off movies on TV that are one very high budget for TV movies, obviously given Lucas was involved. They look pretty darn good, despite some of the issues with, like, there's a spider in the first one that looks terrible. It's so funny. It's such a bad, like, on rods, clearly. The first one, I think, is just kind of like what you expect of, like, a kid-friendly TV movie, where it's just like, oh, it's a couple kids trying to save their parents with the Ewoks on Endor. And then the second one is so dark in a weird way I didn't expect, where within the first 10 minutes, these evil giant alien creatures kill not just a bunch of Ewoks, but 3/4 of the human cast we got to know from the first movie, leaving a little girl orphaned and in shock, and then she has to be adopted basically by Ewoks and Wilford Brimley.
Yeah. I've only seen the first one, really, and I watched it when it went up on Disney Plus. So I'm very excited to watch the second one. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
No, yeah, Battle for Endor is the second one. Caravan of Courage is the first one. They're both very weird, fascinating artifacts, especially of the Star Wars legacy. And they put up a bunch of those. And I'm waiting for Droids. Put it on there, Disney. I want to watch Droids.
Droids apparently coming later this year.
Oh, I can't wait.
Almost there. I did buy one of my quarantine purchases was an Italian Caravan of Courage poster. It's got like really good Drew Struzan art. And when I bought it, I was like, oh, this will just be a normal poster size. This will be great. I'll get it framed and hang it up. It's really cool. It looks cool. And then it got to my apartment, and it's 6.5 feet tall and like 3 feet wide. And I legitimately, like, I still want to frame it because I think it's so funny to just have a 6.5 foot tall Italian Ewok poster hanging up. But it's going to cost me like $1,000, and I'm going to have to go to like some custom framer. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it.
Plus, that just would become your wall. That's just a wall in your home at that point.
Absolutely. I have figured out which wall it will go if it stays here, but I'm like, maybe I just wait until I move to the next place, and then I'll do it so I don't have to move with this giant poster. We'll see.
But Adam, are there any sort of like fun Lucas-y projects you'd want to mention? It's just like interesting besides the obvious that we've been dancing around.
I mean, you guys pretty much just named them all. He doesn't have a giant filmography. No, I mean that's pretty much, you know. I agree with everything you guys have said. I just still, it's George fucking Lucas. I mean, the guy made Star Wars and Indiana Jones and everything else. It's, you know, he's George Lucas, man. He's George Lucas.
Well, what is your favorite Lucas thing, whether it be Star Wars or Indiana Jones or whatever, Adam? What's your favorite?
The Indiana Jones. The Indiana Jones, particularly the first and the third one, are my favorites. I've just always been a huge sort of action adventure fan, and as a kid, you know, growing up, you know, my dad had a bunch of old, like, the Serial magazines and, you know, things like that. And those old comic books would be like Adventure Time. Well, not Adventure Time, that's a thing now, but it would be like, you know, just these crazy pulp comics. And that's what Indiana Jones was on screen. It was super exciting, super fun. I could still watch Raiders of the Lost Ark or Last Crusade or even Temple of Doom anytime it comes on. I do not like Kingdom of Crystal Skull at all, but I also am with Patrick on that it does exist. So it is part of the canon. I just don't like it, so I don't watch it. But I have seen it, and it is what it is.
I'm not going to say my take because it'll make you mad.
No, it's everything makes me mad. Don't worry about it.
Go ahead.
I think it's not bad until it turns into a CGI goop fest at the end. That's my take.
I think there's some fun sequences in there. I think you can tell where, like, people often lump it in with the prequels. But you can tell, like, Spielberg's, like, at least, like, creative energy, I think, is still on display there, even though it's not him at his, like, peak, obviously. I think particularly, I really dig the whole chase that goes on early on when him on Mutt's motorcycle through the college.
Yeah.
I think it's a legit fun sequence.
Oh God, I'm gonna get flamed right now for saying this. I like that fridge sequence. I like when he goes through that 50s nuclear town, and then I like it. I think it looks cool. I think it's fun.
Well, if nothing else, it doesn't feel like a movie that's retreading water. Like we kind of talked about earlier with the other Indiana Jones movies. It's doing something different, which you would have to, given, like, takes place in the 50s. It's a completely different time and place from, like, the 40s when the earlier movies took place. You have to do something completely different. Once again, it's a major swing.
Yep. And genuinely very curious to see how this next one goes.
Oh God, with, like, what it's now James Mangold directing, and Harrison Ford's going to be, like, in his mid-80s probably by the time they start filming it. It's fascinating. No, I think, if nothing else, because, like, people often, like, I sort of, it's a weird journey for me where, like, we mentioned I was, like, a kid when the prequels came out, and then it became a popular thing to hate on, like, oh, not just the prequels, but, like, oh, George Lucas ruined my childhood, that kind of stuff. But I think, especially as time has gone on, I've really just turned on that, where, like, if nothing else, with, like, the modern blockbuster culture we get now, where a lot of things feel so homogenized, like, I kind of miss having that energy of Lucas. Not necessarily for, say, the Star Wars. Like, I'm not one of those guys who just, like, bring Lucas back, because, one, he would have done a lot of similar things. Like, even everyone complains about The Last Jedi, like, oh my God, I can't believe that Luke is on this island. That was the George Lucas idea in, like, his pitch. Yeah. He wanted to do that. So he would have maybe done some more similar things to that movie than you would have expected. At the same time, like, I do miss having his presence around. It's been about a decade, half a decade since Strange Magic, obviously, as we all remember and love Strange Magic. But you miss that kind of weird energy just being put out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think everything that he works on is going for something. Like I said, whether you like it or not, it's trying something. It's evolving cinema. It's changing the way movies are made, and you see that on screen, and you get to see an evolution of, like, special effects and, like, the digital filmmaking and everything like that. You watch it happen in front of your eyes, and I think it's very important stuff to pay attention to, because it really truly changed the culture that we live in today. I know that's such a hot take.
Hot take, massive. George Lucas had a big impact. Whoa.
I agree. And the thing is, like I said earlier, say whatever you will about him. The guy created arguably the greatest pop culture phenomenon franchise that's ever existed up until that time, and even since, I'd argue. And we don't have a George Lucas, I would say, out there right now, going for it and trying new things, whether they work or fail, but really putting his all into it and trying to captivate and excite, audiences, whether they be kids or adults, trying to make something for everybody. You don't really see that sort of gusto out there anymore.
No, yeah. And even down to, like, even with the technology element, not just ILM, not just some of these other things, but a lot of people forget that one of the companies that he bought early on in, like, the late 70s, early 80s was called Graphics Group, who did a lot of the special effects, even stuff for, like, Howard the Duck. They removed, like, some of the wires and stuff for when he's flying around and stuff. And not too long after Howard the Duck, he sold that company off to Steve Jobs. It became Pixar. 100% true thing. So you wouldn't even have your Woody and Buzz without Lucas leading the way.
Yeah. Like I said, sees talent in front of him and knows when it's the right people. Good for him. Good guy. Gives all his money to charity. Seems like a good dude.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's a listener. I'm sure he listens to every episode of Double Edged Double Bill. Huge fan.
Yep.
I'm sure. Just like all of you out there.
Yeah, sat there with his Coke Zeros and stuff.
Sadly sitting there at, like, with his lunch, eating it with one little red tray. Yeah. One of the best pictures of all time. But we want to thank all of you for listening, George and everyone else. Thanks to you, and also thanks to Chris Oliver For the intro and outro music used in our show, listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Carter for the art for our show. Thank you to our loyal patrons, patreon.com/GEDBpod, where for just $1 a month, you guys get to pick movies we cover for the show, pick topics we do, and also listen to bonus podcast stuff we put out there, all for just $1. And we also want to thank, of course, Patrick Cotnoir, our guest. Thank you so much for coming on, Patrick. A lot of fun having you on.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's always nice talking about Uncle George, you know?
Oh, of course, certainly. And where can people find you doing a lot of that out there on the internet?
Yeah, people can find, you can follow me on Twitter at Patrick Cotnoir. I'm currently trying to get more followers in the canceled NBC show 1600 Penn. So you can go there. Or you can watch the George Lucas Talk Show every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific on planetscum.live. All the old episodes are on YouTube. It may seem overwhelming to hop in, but I recommend just finding an episode with someone that you like, a guest that you like, and then just going from there. We're pretty good at explaining the bits that we're doing and trying to catch people up. So I think you'll catch on eventually.
A personal recommendation for a really good jump-in episode would be, I'm not sure which number it is the one you did with Ahmed Best, the voice of Jar Jar.
Yeah.
I think it's one of your best ones.
Yeah, I watched that today, actually, that episode.
Because
Thomas has been talking about, your show for, man, I can't even tell you how long. And and when we had landed you as a guest, that's the link he sent me. He's like, this is a good one to jump in on. And I watched it, and it was really, really quite fun. I'm definitely going to watch more.
He's so good, and he's so interesting, and it's really a shame that, people were so mean to him, because dude's really talented and really smart, and deserves to have, much more opportunities than I think he's gotten over the last, couple decades. So I hope that is turning around soon. He seems to be working on a lot of cool stuff.
No, and he doesn't seem at all bitter about it. He seems like he's genuinely sort of like really owned the Jar Jar character and like voiced him in different things still to this day. I think he's especially like on your show, he had such fun things to say. And I would also recommend not just watching that particular episode, but then that after show is also so fascinating, where I won't say what exactly happened because you cut it out, but I'll say I was there for the person that you quote unquote interview, the second guest, as your fans call it.
Yeah, no comment.
Yeah, no comment, of course not. But definitely would recommend, especially you guys release the things on YouTube around like Tuesdays when we put our show up. So the Seth Rogen thing will probably be up around this time that you're listening to this.
Yeah.
Yes. And for more of our fun, you can follow us at DEDBpod on Facebook and Twitter, where we put up the feelers about the questionnaires asking what your favorite, least favorite things related to whatever topic we do are. And you can also email us doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And if you can't, support us on the Patreon monthly, why not buy some merch over at the ESO TeePublic store, where you can buy, shirts or mugs or anything else with our logo on it. Gives us a bit of a kickback, really helps us out.
Buy our merch. Buy our merch.
We make him do that every week, Patrick. He has to do it by contractual obligation.
I love it.
And you can find me doing more of my stuff on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy. And also I do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.
Yep, and I am on Twitter and Instagram at Atom or Adam, it's ATOM_OR_ADAM. Don't do a lot on there. Share GoFundMe, share random bullshit pictures of my dogs, paintings I've done, things like that. But if you want to follow me on there, I'll share your stuff too. Why not? Just as long as you do the fucking same for me and my show.
And also, you should probably give a shout. You were on a guest spot on the show recently.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was recently on friend of the show, Rafe Telfs, is podcast Have Not Seen This, and we discussed the film The Jacket, starring Adrian Brody and Keira Knightley. Really, really fun little sci-fi thriller time travel movie. So definitely give that a listen. It was super fun.
Yes, and for more of our silly fun, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on ESO, why not dig into the other great shows on the network? And you can also dig into our archives on our Podbean main feed for all the shows we did even before we joined ESO. And nothing else if you can't, buy the merch or support us on the Patreon. If you just rate, review, or share the show around, that helps us get more visibility out there.
Yeah, like I said earlier when I threatened everybody about my Twitter, just share the show.
Just keeping fans, doing the best to keep fans around, for sure. But now, Adam, it's time to do our picking for the next episode. And usually what we do is someone will have 2 good picks, and the other one will have 2 bad picks. And usually we choose from each other's choices that we've assigned in between 1 and 10 for, and that gets us our good and bad choice for the next week. And next week, because the Oscars are going to be a thing, we're doing a fun topic where we decided on that was Oscar nominated, which is basically the premise is a movie where you find out it's Oscar nominated and you're baffled by that, whether it's a good movie or a bad movie. We thought it was kind of fun because I love looking at that kind of stuff where it's just like, oh wait, this movie nominated for an Oscar? That's fascinating. I can't, that baffles me. And Adam, you have the 2 good ones for that. I got the 2 bad. And whenever we have a guest on, we like them to go ahead and pick a number between 1 and 10 for each of our choices. So for Adam's 2 good choices, Patrick, just pick a number between 1 and 10.
6.
All right, at number 8, I have not only was it nominated, but it actually.
Oh, I said 6. Wait, I said 6.
Well, no, it's like whatever's closest to the 2. Well, I'm sorry, we didn't explain this properly.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's totally fine.
No, we didn't have 10. We just have 10 different picks at 10 different numbers.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, that might be a fun idea, but anyways, I at number 8, I have not only has it nominated, but it won for Best Song, and I remember being completely baffled. I have the Terrence Howard Hustle and Flow.
Oh, right.
Good guy.
Hard out here for a pimp.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. At the time, 3-6 Mafia, 1 Oscar, Martin Scorsese, 0.
I mean, listen, great Studio 60 musical guest, 3-6 Mafia.
That's true.
Yep.
Very true.
For about 3 people here.
My alternate choice was a film that was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. I have Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys.
Yeah, very good movie. Pretty solid choice. All right. But now, Patrick, for my 2 bad choices, number between 1 and 10.
9.
Okay, that's closest to number 10, which I have a movie that was nominated for Best Art Direction and Best Costume Design, despite being a really infamous bomb that I haven't seen in a very long time, but I'm curious too. It is the Robin Williams vehicle Toys.
Oh, no.
Very, very excited for that. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, at number 2, I have a George C. Scott vehicle directed by Mike Nichols that was nominated for Best Sound and Best Score called The Day of the Dolphin, which I haven't seen, but I mainly know for the amazing tagline, which I will quote here, unwittingly, he trained a dolphin to kill the President of the United States.
Yeah, now I gotta watch that movie. Wow, so we have a movie about a Southern pimp who becomes a rapper and hustle
and flow. Well, that'll be all next time. But until then, guys, study your quack foo.
Oh, God.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.